Hello, this is Todd Luck, and I had a suggestion to do a video on the reading order for the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe books and comics that have come out in the last few years, and I thought that was a great idea, so that's what this video is going to be, and it's a really great time to do that. If you are watching it in November of 2022, there is a lot going on, and the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe is expanding as we speak. Victory Harben is out on Kindle and Audible right now and should be shipping very soon. And the Kickstarter for the next Jane Porter graphic novel, Jane Porter and the City of Fire, is going on right now. It's been fully funded, so you can get in on that if you want. And so we're going to go over the Swords of Eternity arc in the novels and the comics that tie into it. And so the novels are, in the main arc, Carson of Venus, Edge of All Worlds, Tarzan, Battle for Pellucidar, John Carter, Gods of the Forgotten, and Victory Harben, Fires of Halos. Now, I will preface this by saying that I have not made it all the way through my advanced copy of Victory Harben here. There will be a review coming, but this will be a list that will not include any revelations, if there are any, in Victory Harben. And as far as comics go, we're going to be talking about comics that have been put out by American Mythology that are considered canon and tie in some way to the Swords of Eternity arc. And that's going to begin with Carson of Venus, Eye of Amtor, starting in 2020. Now, before we get started, I just want to get a couple things out of the way that were published during this time but don't necessarily tie into anything. One of those is going to be the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe novel Tarzan and the Forest of Stone. This is a good story. It's Tarzan pursuing some criminals through the Arizona desert. It takes place directly after Tarzan and the Lion Man by Edgar Rice Burroughs, but it doesn't tie into any of the current novels. It's just a good self-contained story. As far as the comics go, there's Carson of Venus, Realm of the Dead. This is a really cool story. It's Carson of Venus versus zombies. It follows up on some stuff from the second novel, and it does not tie into anything. It was actually a follow-up to some older stories that American Mythology had already started. Not official canon, but really cool story. And speaking of really good stuff, Zorro in the Land That Time Forgot. This is set back during Zorro's time period, so it's well before the original novels, and obviously since Zorro is in there, it can't be canon, but this is one of the best crossovers I have ever read in a comic, so I highly recommend it. And lastly, there is the Edgar Rice Burroughs sketchbook. This isn't really a story so much as it's a how-to guide on how to make comics. Mike Wolfer shows you how the American Mythology Edgar Rice Burroughs comics are made from script to finished product. And so if you're looking for a guide on how to make good comics, this is really good stuff. All right, and so the Swords of Eternity super arc begins with Carson of Venus, Eye of Amtor, followed by the Carson of Venus, The Edge of All Worlds novel. Now, Eye of Amtor does take place before the novel. It's not really all that big of a factor in there. He does mention it in passing, and it is really neat. This is the first official canon comic that's ever been published. It is a good story. I do recommend picking it up, even though it's not like a big factor in the novel itself. And both of them feature a Victory Harben backup. And so Eye of Amtor actually has this exact same Victory Harben story, but in comic book form. So I actually recommend getting them both because it's really neat to kind of read it in novel form, but then also see it play out visually in the backup stories here. And plus, Eye of Amtor is the actual first appearance of Victory Harben, so that's kind of cool. And if you want to, there's even a Victory Harben variant cover you can get of this issue. And so the main novel is Carson and his friends saving Venus from this ancient race that's trying to take it over. And then in the back, this is the beginning of Victory Harben's quest, which involves her and Jason Gridley, for various science fiction-y reasons, being teleported between worlds, and they go to all these different worlds that Edgar Rice Burroughs created, and so Jason Gridley tends to end up teleporting into the middle of the adventures in the main novels, and then Victory Harben's is told through the backup novelettes, where she goes to other places that we'll see. So this plotline takes place in 1950, with the exception of the second book, which is Tarzan Battle for Pellucidar. And so this is set in World War II and has Tarzan and his badass granddaughter Suzanne going up against Nazis and Mahars at the Earth's core. And the reason this is second is that it has the Victory Harben backup novelette, and so that takes place after that first novelette in the Carson of Venus. And so this is Victory Harben teleporting to the land that time forgot and having an adventure there with Sita the Savage, which is from the American Mythology comics, and it's written by Mike Wolfer, who created Sita, so it was really cool. As far as comics go, there are no Tarzan comics that tie into this, and I know that's a little surprising because he's the most famous character, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, there have been no regular, officially licensed Tarzan comics for a couple of decades now. That will change on November 9th. We are getting Lord of the Jungle #1 from Dynamite Comics. It's officially licensed, written by Dan Jurgens. It probably won't be canon, but it should be good. So what comics are related to this? Well, why don't we start with that backup story set in the land that time forgot. So Sita is going to describe her backstory and her origin to you. And if you would like to see that in comic book form, I highly recommend picking up the Land That Time Forgot Annual or the Sita the Savage miniseries. It's 2 parts. It's the same material. It's not been declared canon, but it is pretty much the exact same thing you're reading in the novel as far as her backstory goes, and it has gorgeous Mike Wolfer art. One series that ties in that is listed as official canon is The Land That Time Forgot Fearless, which stars Tyler Bowen and Liz LaRue from the original novel. And so this miniseries is how Sita met both of them, and so this is something that she does allude to in the novelette. Now, looking at the main novel here, there is a scene with Victory Harben as a child that gives us some important backstory there, but the comics actually go a little bit further back and give us the story of how her mother met her father at the Earth's core. And so it's a really cool story called Pellucidar Across Savage Seas. And incidentally, this is how Christopher Paul Carey got the idea for Victory Harben. He actually originally had this idea for Gretchen von Harben from the Tarzan twins to have this adventure and meet her husband, and then it just organically came out that, you know, their child would be the right age around 1950 to have this adventure, and that's how we got Victory Harben. Battle for Pellucidar also has references to the Philip Jose Farmer novel Tarzan and the Dark Heart of Time, which in recent years has had an Edgar Rice Burroughs universe printing. So if you're motivated enough to read a whole novel to get all the references, have at it. All right, let's move on to that third novel and get our ass to Mars with John Carter of Mars, Gods of the Forgotten. This is an amazing novel, and it's the further adventures of the warlord of Mars. There's a mysterious villain. We got his daughter Tara. We got the Chaldean Gek. And if I told you any more, I'd be giving it away. But you can check out my review. I've done reviews of all this stuff. It's really good. And so the backup is Victory Harben, this time in the world inside the moon from Moon Maid. And that's also a really good novelette. And so, yes, there are many John Carter and John Carter related comics from Dynamite. However, none of them are official canon and none of them tie into this. Maybe someday we can get some canon comics out of them, but right now Dynamite just kind of does their own thing with Mars. However, there is a character that John Carter meets in Gods of the Forgotten, and I don't want to spoil who it is, but let's just say there's some additional backstory for that character that was told in the comics, and that's Carson of Venus, The Flames Beyond. And this has not been declared canon, but it is written by Christopher Paul Carey, who wrote Victory Harben and is in charge of all these novels, so it's at least canon adjacent. All right, so before we get to that last novel with Victory Harben, there's actually a couple novels they published that still relate to this storyline, even though they're not part of the main story. And so in Tarzan Battle for Pellucidar, there were a couple of stories mentioned that were not written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And so they printed these in book form and brought them into the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe. The first one is Mahars of Pellucidar, or Mahars of Pellucidar, however you like to pronounce it. There is no definitive way to pronounce Mahar. And then the other one is the sequel, Red Axe of Pellucidar, which is the first time it's been officially published. Both these involve some insights into Mahar science and how they view humans that are followed up on in the Swords of Eternity arc. And so the backup novelette here was also mentioned in Tarzan at Battle for Pellucidar, and the story here is Tarzan and the Land That Time Forgot by Joe R. Lansdale. So they put that in there to bring it into official canon. And then the backup novelette here is actually a tie-in directly into Swords of Eternity. It's Jason Gridley of Earth across the moons of Mars. And so this takes place with Jason Gridley directly after the John Carter of Mars, Gods of the Forgotten novel. This, he looks at the moons of Mars and then suddenly he's owned them in this novelette, and this is his adventures. Do you need it to understand what's going on in Victory Harben? I would say you're probably not going to, but it will tell you how Jason Gridley gets from point A to point B, and it's really, really good, guys. I really recommend just about everything I'm showing you here. And that brings us to the final novel in this arc, Victory Harben's Fires of Halos, and this will wrap up the super arc. And so I haven't made it to the end, so I don't know how it ends, but we do have a hint about what happens to her afterwards, because we have a miniseries set afterwards with Victory Harben called Beyond the Farthest Star, Warriors of Xandar. And so this is a fantastic miniseries, and we have her alien partner here, Tila, and she has the novelette at the back of the Victory Harben novel called Beyond the Furthest Star, Rescue on Xandar. And so, everything's connected here, and eventually we will get a follow-up to this. Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. is going to be putting out a Victory Harben graphic novel that will be called Ghost of Omos. And so there's a couple of the canon comic series that don't directly tie into anything I just talked about, but are really good, and most likely they're just going to kind of stand on their own. And one of those is Monster Men, which is an excellent follow-up to the original novel, and it's got 7 issues, which just recently wrapped up, and hopefully there will be more from Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. somewhere down the line. And then Moon Maid, The Three Keys. And so this one could eventually tie in, maybe, because mysteriously this is a story that Victory Harben is relaying to the protagonist of Monster Men, and that's how we're told this story. Usually in a Burroughs novels, who the narrator is pretty incidental, but it could eventually tie into something, and we may end up finding out how Victory found out about this. And then there's the Jane Porter comics from Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. And so this is available on Edgar Rice Burroughs' website. And this is Jane Porter, The Primordial Peril, set in 1952. And so you'll notice that that is after the Swords of Eternity arc. And that may be significant because in the graphic novel, Jane Porter and the City of Fire, where they're doing the Kickstarter right now, is going to follow up directly after that issue. And she's going to go down to the Earth's core and end up on another planet, which is kind of what happened to Victory Harben. So it's very possible it may tie in, especially since where she ends up at looks remarkably like Xandar or a surrounding planet. So it is very possible this may follow up, and it could also tie into the Victory Harben graphic novel, which is up next after they finish Jane Porter. And after Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. does the Victory Harben graphic novel, there will be a Tarzan and the Jaguar Sun graphic novel, which we don't have any information about right now. As far as novels go, there's going to be a Dija Thorez Shadow of the Assassins novel, and there's also going to be a Korak at the Earth's Core novel, and that's going to begin a new super arc that's going to be called the Dead Moon Super Arc, and essentially it's a trilogy of novels with the Tarzan family at the Earth's core. And so the next novel will have Tarzan's granddaughter Suzanne in it, and then the last novel in that arc will have Tarzan and Jane. And so it is an amazing time to be an Edgar Rice Burroughs fan, because not only do we have a novel with a new character in it, we have Jane Porter Kickstarter, and we're going to be able to walk into comic shops on November 9th, which is next week, and get a new regular Tarzan series, which is amazing. And so all of that is great, and then everything that is coming up sounds very exciting. And so I'll have reviews, of course, the Tarzan comic and the Jane Porter graphic novel whenever I get it, and Victory Harben when I finish the book, and all kinds of other things. So like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, see ya.